They left the footage in on purpose. It was a moment so raw, so completely unscripted that the highest-ranking CBS executives watched the tape roll and felt their stomachs drop because they knew that cutting it would expose their own machinery. Tom and Dick Smothers did not simply create a variety hour for television. They completely weaponized the medium. It took just one single blooper, one completely unguarded second of a live broadcast, to permanently shatter the sense of absolute control held by the most powerful network in America. Think back to the very first time you watched Tom Smothers say something on screen that made you stop and question if they were genuinely allowed to utter those words on the airwaves. The year was 1967, and the entire fabric of America was shifting at an undeniable pace. Major cities across the nation were growing increasingly restless, and young men were constantly being shipped off to fight a brutal war in Vietnam. Yet, on Sunday nights, families across the country still gathered around their television sets to watch a safe, comfortable Western about a traditional father and his sons on a remote Nevada ranch. That show was Bonanza, and it reigned supreme as the absolute #1 show in America. Nothing in the industry was supposed to touch it. The executives at CBS believed they had discovered the ultimate sacrificial lamb to throw into that impossible time slot. Tom and Dick Smothers were just a pair of clean-cut folk singers with a quirky comedy act. They had worked the traditional club circuit, made brief guest appearances on standard variety shows, and possessed an undeniable charm. They were immensely talented, but according to every cynical calculation made inside the CBS boardroom, they were destined to be completely forgotten by February. The corporate network handed them the Sunday night slot directly opposite the cultural giant of Bonanza, acting the exact way a master chess player sacrifices a minor pawn without a single shred of grief, ceremony, or second thought. Nobody bothered to inform Tom and Dick Smothers that they were systematically engineered to lose. The entire American television landscape of 1967 was fundamentally constructed on the concept of absolute obedience. Legendary hosts curated their guest lists like precise museum directors, while musical programs played melodies that had never offended a single living soul in history. Popular game shows continuously rewarded everyday contestants for being pleasant and entirely unthreatening. The supreme, unwritten law of American network television was remarkably simple: entertain the masses, but never disturb their peace. Make the audience laugh, but never dare to make them think deeply. Above all else, never under any imaginable circumstances make the corporate advertisers feel uncomfortable. The Smothers brothers boldly broke that foundational law from the moment of their very first broadcast. Dick Smothers served as the absolute anchor of the entire act. He was calm, remarkably handsome, and masterfully deadpan in his delivery. He held his bass guitar and delivered his straight lines with the profound patience of a man who had long ago fully accepted that his own brother was destined to embarrass him in front of millions of people. Dick represented the rigid structure, the undeniable reliability, and the exact reason why the show felt safe enough for everyday families to tune into each week. Tom, however, was something else entirely. Tom Smothers constantly fumbled his words on stage. He frequently forgot his punchlines and routinely interrupted Dick right in the middle of a sentence. He masterfully played a distinct character, the heavily put upon, slightly dim, and emotionally volatile younger brother that global audiences found completely irresistible because it felt completely real. In an entertainment medium built entirely on flawless polish and synthetic perfection, Tom's incredibly rough edges felt like pure oxygen to a suffocating public. This introduces the core dynamic of control versus chaos. The network demanded absolute control, while Tom weaponized chaotic vulnerability. What the CBS executives never truly understood, not in 1967 and certainly not 2 years later when it was far too late to fix, was that Tom Smothers never fumbled because he lacked true talent. Tom Smothers fumbled his lines because he had made a highly calculated, brilliant decision about exactly how a man with something deeply important to say survives inside a corporate system explicitly designed to silence him forever. The mistakes were never entirely accidental, and the stumbles were never truly random. By the definitive end of their very first season, the Comedy Hour had accomplished something absolutely no one in the industry predicted. It had officially beaten Bonanza in the national ratings. The network's disposable pawn had successfully taken the king. For one shining, terrifying moment, the corporate network fully realized it had invited something into its Sunday night lineup that it did not fully comprehend and could not fully control. What CBS never predicted, what absolutely nobody could have foreseen, was that the brothers' greatest weapon would not be a brilliant monologue or a beautiful song. It would be a profound mistake that no one could ever prove was a mistake at all. Deep inside the massive broadcast facility of CBS, there sat a specific department that the vast majority of regular viewers never even knew existed. It was officially called Standards and Practices. Its formal, public purpose was to vigorously protect the American public from any content deemed inappropriate for traditional family viewing. Its actual purpose, as the turbulent final years of the 1960s would definitively prove, was considerably more complicated and darker than that. The network editors reviewed every single script before it was allowed to be filmed. They meticulously reviewed every filmed segment before it could be edited, and they rigorously reviewed every edited segment before it ever aired on television. It was a brutal system of 3 distinct layers of gatekeeping. Every layer was designed with a single goal in mind, to guarantee that whatever finally reached the American living room on Sunday night at 9 o'clock was precisely what CBS, its corporate advertisers, and its powerful political allies felt comfortable displaying. The brothers fought them fiercely on absolutely everything. Scripts regularly came back from the Standards and Practices department completely covered in aggressive red marks. Entire segments were routinely flagged as entirely unacceptable for broadcast without a single word of explanation. Prestigious guest bookings were abruptly rejected, and writers were told that certain critical topics were simply off the table. The ongoing Vietnam War, the military draft, deep-seated racial inequality, and the massive counterculture movement growing rapidly in America's streets were explicitly deemed non-debatable and non-negotiable. In September of 1967, the folk legend Pete Seeger was booked as a special guest. Seeger had been ruthlessly blacklisted from American television for nearly 2 full decades, a prominent casualty of the intense anti-communist purges that had swept through Hollywood during the 1950s. The Smothers brothers courageously brought him back to the screen. He performed a powerful song called Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, which served as a thinly veiled but completely unmistakable condemnation of the current presidential escalation of the Vietnam War. CBS instantly cut the performance, leaving it completely gone from the air. The brothers refused to stay silent and went public with their immense outrage. The resulting public uproar was significant enough that the network ultimately capitulated, allowing Seeger to return in early 1968 to perform the song in its entirety. It was a monumental victory, but it cost them dearly. From that exact moment forward, the intense scrutiny from Standards and Practices grew exponentially. The red marks on their weekly scripts multiplied rapidly. Then came the legendary Harry Belafonte. In April of 1968, just mere days after the devastating assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Belafonte taped an incredibly moving performance for the show. He sang Don't Stop the Carnival, but behind his performance, instead of a traditional band, the network saw a visual backdrop it simply could not allow the public to see. The backdrop was a profound montage of intense real-world images, featuring the chaotic Democratic National Convention riots in Chicago, raw footage from the battlefields of Vietnam, and the vivid faces of a nation tearing itself completely apart. Belafonte's visionary producers had constructed a piece of television that was completely detached from simple entertainment. It was a profound eulogy and a direct accusation. CBS pulled the entire segment the night before the broadcast. No explanation was ever offered to the brothers, and no explanation was given to Belafonte. The tape simply ceased to exist within the broadcast schedule, immediately replaced by something entirely harmless, completely forgettable, and safely designed to ensure no advertiser would reach for the telephone on Monday morning. By late 1968, the writer's room at the Comedy Hour felt exactly like a fortified military bunker. The elite creative team understood that every single script they submitted was directly entering highly hostile territory. They quickly learned the complex art of hiding their best, most subversive material deep inside their least suspicious sketches. They learned to bury the real, biting joke multiple layers beneath the innocent surface joke. Tom Smothers later described this intense period as a form of relentless creative warfare. Every single week was a brutal battle, and every battle left permanent scars on the creators. The immense pressure was completely relentless. The profound tension between what the brothers desperately wanted to say and what the corporate network would allow them to say had been building steadily for 2 full seasons. The editing room had become a dark place where the truth went to be killed quietly, efficiently, and entirely without ceremony every single week. However, there is a fundamental law in physics that applies just as perfectly to creative suppression as it does to nature. When immense pressure has absolutely nowhere to go, it will eventually discover its own exit. Then came the historic night where the camera caught something that the editor's scissors simply arrived too late to kill. The broadcast happened, the cameras rolled, and in a fleeting moment that lasted only a matter of seconds, something remarkable slipped through the cracks. Fully understanding what makes this particular blooper so extraordinary requires a clear understanding of what television production actually looked like in 1968. The show was never broadcast live in the traditional format. Segments were meticulously taped well in advance, thoroughly reviewed by the network, and then assembled for the final broadcast. This specific system existed precisely to grant CBS the necessary time to cut anything that made them uncomfortable. It was a massive safety net, a completely controlled corporate environment, and a strict filter, which ultimately makes what survived all the more truly remarkable. The sequence in question occurs during a segment that on the surface appears completely innocuous. The brothers are right in the middle of their incredibly familiar comedic banter. Dick is perfectly composed, Tom is slightly unraveling, and the live studio audience is warm and thoroughly engaged. Then, something shifts fundamentally. Tom's expression changes, not in a dramatic way that would immediately register as significant to a casual viewer watching in 1968, but frame by frame, if the footage is studied with absolute care, the shift is unmistakable. There is a very brief glance off camera, the exact kind of look a performer makes when they are checking on something or someone they are absolutely not supposed to be looking at during an active take. Then Tom speaks a specific line, and the line lands completely differently than anything else around it. Television historians who have deeply analyzed the surviving footage describe the moment as a total tonal rupture. It was a split second where the performance and the real performer completely separated, where the beloved character Tom Smothers had been playing for 2 years briefly stepped aside to allow the actual Tom Smothers to speak directly to the lens of the camera. The laugh track instantly responds, and the audience laughs, but the actual quality of that laughter to highly trained ears is entirely different. It is not the comfortable, easy laughter of everyday people enjoying a joke they fully expected to hear. It is the